The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side. The one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue. The one the other will absorb, as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ, if they do, as syllable from sound. A baby's brain. Less than 1 pound of gelatinous tissue, and within its milky, convoluted folds, a universe of meaning. Emotions, ideas, memories, dreams, all will somehow find a home here, evolving and changing over a lifetime.
The ultimate machine and the ultimate source of everything. We understand the world the way we do because of the brains we have. We will understand the brain itself the way we will because of the brains we have.
The brain is the most complex thing on Earth. Even the brain of a baby is wildly complicated.
A piece of the brain, the size of a grain of rice, contains about 10,000 nerve cells, just in that little piece. You can just imagine how many pieces you have in your head. Within that 10,000 nerve cells, each nerve cell can make anywhere between 1 to 10,000 connections with other nerve cells. So there are something like 1 trillion connections.
It's almost overwhelming to think about the whole thing. If you think about how the whole brain and nervous system gets assembled, you just want to throw up your hands and say it's way too complicated. We're never going to understand it. The brain is the seat of our consciousness, of who we are. And in understanding where it comes from, we understand where we come from.
When you think about our planet, it is one huge living body because of the water that flows through it. And across the land masses, you can have veins of water and arteries of water flowing. This flows into our ocean, which is the heart of our Earth. And it exhales. It evaporates water and puts water back into the hydrologic cycle, which then again goes up to the mountaintops and again comes down in the form of veins and arteries. So our planet is just one huge living body with water constantly circulating through it, and it is the water that gives it life. We too are like the surface of our planet, 70% water and 30% solid. We too have a heart. We have 60,000 miles of veins and arteries. And just like the earth recycles the water, we have a water cycle within us.
The United States does not keep active records of how many people get sick from our water supply every year. There are estimates that from 500,000 to 7 million people get sick per year from drinking the tap water.
One of the problems is that we have lots of bugs in the system. Viruses, pathogens, bacteria. A lot of those things that you think of as stomach viruses or flus, about 40% of those come from your drinking water.
We are not removing things like industrial chemicals rocket fuel, pesticides, certain pharmaceuticals, drugs that were discharged either by big animal factories or by sewage treatment plants. A lot of people think they don't have to worry about their water supply because they go out and buy bottled water. Well, we have news for them. In fact, a lot of your exposure to many of the chemicals comes from the simple act of showering in them. So some of these more volatile pollutants come in through your skin.
There are over 116,000 human-made chemicals. We have no idea how they interact. We are becoming experiments for these synthetic chemicals. And when the liver takes these chemicals out of our bodies, what happens? They get flushed down the toilet. And then they go into the aquifer. And then they go into our rivers and streams. We take the water from the rivers and streams, and we put it into our public water supply systems, and we're drinking it again.
All those pharmaceuticals, all those cosmetics, all the stuff that's in there, you know what? It's changing the chemistry in our bodies, and it's hurting us.
For the last 30 years, since the Green Revolution brought chemical agriculture to India, there are two problems that it has created for water systems. The first problem is the crops are actually highly inefficient in water use. They need lots of water to dissolve the chemicals, and that means 5 to 10 times more water is used to produce the same amount of food.
70% de la consommation mondiale est d'origine agricole, 20% d'origine industrielle, 10% les usagers domestiques. C'est les usages agricoles et industriels qui font qu'on a besoin de plus en plus d'eau pour faire pousser les choses qui ne devraient pas pousser à tel endroit. Et évidemment, pour faire pousser tout ça, il faut aussi des engrais, des produits phytosanitaires, de la chimie. Et évidemment, la chimie avec l'eau et dans les terres, ça ne fait pas bon ménage. Et aujourd'hui, y compris dans des analyses qui sont rendues non publiques, on s'aperçoit que par exemple l'eau de la Seine, mais on s'est rendu compte que dans les 5 dernières années, dans l'eau de Seine, les poissons avaient changé de sexe. Il n'y avait que des femelles, et puis il n'y a plus de mâles. Le problème, c'est qu'on n'a pas de solution, puisqu'on faut toujours boire de l'eau. Hein. Même si vous croyez en Dieu, malheureusement, la pollution, elle est diffuse. Hein.
We mustn't forget that these chemicals were designed for warfare. They are the ultimate weapons of mass destruction. Every one of them came out of the war system. Now they are in our drinking water.
Ça peut paraître exagéré, franchement, ça ne l'est pas. Et tout ça, c'est pas dans 50 ans, dans 100 ans, on est en pleine actualité.
People assume that there's somebody in the government protecting their water supply, and that's often not the case. One of the most extraordinary examples of that is the most common pesticide sprayed in the United States, atrazine.
Atrazine itself is an herbicide, or a weed killer, and it's used on products such as corn. It is the #1 contaminant found in drinking water, and groundwater, and surface water. Initially, we were contracted by Syngenta, the makers of atrazine, and their interest was in trying to understand whether or not, so they said, whether or not atrazine could function as an endocrine disruptor, meaning could it interfere with hormones such as thyroid hormone, testosterone, estrogen. We found that atrazine had a number of effects, but most significantly, atrazine demasculized the exposed male frogs. I would even say chemically castrated. We went on to show that in addition to being demasculized, they were also feminized. So in other words, male amphibians would grow ovaries and even produce eggs. Fish show similar effects. Their sperm counts drop and they start to make egg yolk protein. Does that mean that atrazine is causing a global decline in sperm counts in men? Again, the experimental and the epidemiological data suggest that atrazine may play a very significant role.
Right, now I'm going to start the process of electrolysis. On the right you can see a glass full of distilled water, and on the left you can see the regular unfiltered tap water. So let's get it started. I will give you a closer look. So, as you can see, the distilled water didn't change at all, while the regular tap water has turned into a green and brownish glue full of these delicious and tasty spots. And this is actually what you drink every time you drink from your tap water. So yes, alright, so basically that's what I just wanted to show you. That is how much of a difference there is between regular tap water and distilled water. Alright, thank you for watching and take care everyone. Bye bye.
The place we spend a lot of time is in bed, at least 8 hours a night, most of us. Now, what most people have in their bedroom is they have a PowerPoint right here next to their head on either side of the bed, and there's also an electrical lead running right behind in the wall, right behind here. I'm going to show you in another experiment, another video using a Gauss meter, how this electrical field actually radiates out right to where our head is while we're sleeping. So I think it's particularly important for myself to be earthed while I'm sleeping in an electrical field such as this. So again, I've got my multimeter. I've got it earthed through a PowerPoint, and I'm going to see what my voltage is just standing on the floor in the bedroom. It's a massive 15 volts. This is the highest reading that I've had outside, inside, anywhere. I'm at 15 volts standing on the bedroom floor. Now I've got a sheet on my bed which is earthed. If we have a close look at that, you're going to see it's got silver thread running through it. It connects in here with a lead and goes into the earth socket in the power point. Alternatively, you can run it out a window and use the earthing rod I showed you before. So let's see what happens to my voltage when I sit on the bed fully clothed. Let's see what happens. So I'm at around 15 volts as I was before. I sit on the bed with clothes and I drop down to 2.9 volts. So that's quite dramatic. That's about a 5-fold reduction, fully clothed, sitting on an earth sheet. Now what happens if I get up onto the sheet? My bare feet touch it. It drops 10-fold to 0.2. So just having a little bit of skin contact. I am getting earth through my clothes, but I get more when my skin comes in contact. Now the question is, do I get more earth the more skin I have in touch with the earthing sheet? So to do that, there's only one way to find out. So it's still around 0.2, so even it's giving me more connection, but it's not giving me a huge amount more earthing, around 0.2. It's still very low, and I'm very happy to be at 0.2 rather than at 15 volts, which is what I would be if I wasn't sleeping on this sheet. So as you can see, we've got some practical solutions for grounding yourself in the home. Outdoors is pretty easy because you can go barefoot or wear grounders, and hopefully we've demonstrated to you the effect or how much voltage is really coming into our bodies when we're inside a house or near power lines. So here's to your health, and look forward to showing you some other videos using a Gauss meter and some of our other products.
Than that of an 8-year-old child. But when we investigate the company that makes the Sun Phantom head, we discover that the news is even worse. The Sun Phantom isn't just the average of 10,000 people. It's the average of 10,000 US Army personnel. And US Army personnel most certainly have a larger, bigger, thicker head than the average 8-year-old. It's pretty reasonable to assume that if most mobile phones were tested against the skull of an 8-year-old, they would fail.
Who is it that sets the standards?
A group of people from a committee called ICNIRP.
The people who do the work on mobile phones are, by and large, engineers. They have no idea what is going on inside the living cell, but they are pontificating on this. They make the assumption that the only thing that can affect the well-being of a living organism is if it is powerful enough to heat the tissue. But that's like saying, we know if we boil an egg, it goes hard. What they don't know is that if they don't boil the egg, it turns into a chicken. And they haven't the slightest idea how that happens, but yet they pontificate as if they do.
In 2011, the World Health Organization changed the danger rating of mobile phones, reclassing it as possibly carcinogenic to humans, based on an increased risk of contracting a glioma, the type of brain tumor associated with using a mobile phone. What was the catalyst for this abrupt change in status? There have been countless studies conducted into the possible health effects of mobile phones. Some showing an effect, some showing no effect. But the most conclusive came from Leonard Hardell. He has overseen the largest and most comprehensive piece of research ever conducted, combining his own work with that of others from around the world. From the early 1990s, they have investigated the phone habits of more than 2,000 people from around the world. People with tumours such as astrocytoma and acoustic neuroma, the brain tumours associated most with mobile phone use due to their proximity to the ear. Their findings are shocking. They concluded that mobile phone use does increase the risk of a brain tumour. And they also discovered why earlier research showed no effect.
I think there's more evidence that it's carcinogenic than just possibly carcinogenic. But I can understand it in a way because most of the cancers which will arrive haven't arrived yet. I mean, people haven't been using cell phones for long enough for the true effect to become apparent.
As is the case with other carcinogens, it takes at least 10 years before you start to see an effect from the exposure. Because the mobile phone explosion didn't really take hold until the late 1990s, it's not surprising we are just starting to see the effects right now. So what are the telecoms industry doing to protect its users from contracting a brain tumour? A flick to the far reaches of their safety manuals suggests that they are more concerned about protecting themselves. At the back of almost every single phone's user guide are instructions on how far to keep your phone from your body. Instructions which, in the most part, are wholly unworkable. And what happens when the telecoms industry funds research into the harm that they are causing? And that research concludes that there is an effect. That the use of a mobile phone does play a role in the development of cancer. They tend to keep that research to themselves.
We just don't know what we're storing up with EMF because the effects are largely long-term, and we have, as you say, this ubiquitous exposure and ubiquitous reliance on these exposures. We just don't fully understand yet what we're doing.
Although the epidemiology clearly shows that using a mobile phone increases the risk of contracting a brain tumour, what people like ICNIRP need to see is a definitive cause and effect. How it happens. What's the mechanism? How exactly is the cancer caused? It may seem obvious that a being so tuned in to the Earth's frequencies and so sensitive to her magnetic fields would naturally have a reaction to man-made microwaves. But for years, the telecoms industry have defended their actions by asking the same question. As it turns out, they've been asking the wrong question. The answer is melatonin.
You know, melatonin is a hormone, and believe it or not, it's made in the brain. It's made in the pineal gland of the brain, and it's got a very powerful antioxidant status compared with vitamins. For example, melatonin is 5 times as powerful as vitamin C and twice as powerful as vitamin E. And it secretes only at night, and it's at night that we need it because that's when we go to sleep and when our brain repairs the cells of our body. And that's when melatonin comes out to do its work.
Each day, our body loses about 500 million cells. And at night, that's when our body replaces those cells. Through a process called cell mitosis, the dividing of cells.
And what it's doing is it's mopping up what are called free radicals. These free radicals are really the spare electrons left over from the process of making the energy which we need to repair ourselves in the first place.
Each night, as our body repairs itself, millions of free radical cells are created as a byproduct of cell mitosis. These free radical cells attack healthy cells. It is universally agreed that the free radical cell is the main causal factor in most cancer. Our body's main defense against these free radicals is its most powerful antioxidant, melatonin.
It passes into the bloodstream, and its job is to act as a natural antioxidant, a natural anti-cancer agent. Melatonin is a very, very powerful anti-cancer agent.
What it does is it acts as what's called an oncostatic agent, that is, it protects you against cancer. It controls the sleep-wake cycle so that you get a good night's sleep when you've got proper melatonin. It's an anti-aging molecule. In other words, by mopping up those free radicals, it leaves your skin and complexion looking younger. We have in our lab 12,000 studies, which we've collected over the years. And that is more studies than have ever been published on paracetamol, which is the most common headache reliever. There's more scientific interest in melatonin than there is in paracetamol.
What are the consequences of having a reduced amount of melatonin?
Yeah. Well, you have a reduced amount of melatonin. What happens then is that your immune system starts to be less competent for a start. You tend to get sleep disturbance. You can't get off to sleep, or if you do, you wake up and can't get back to sleep. You can have heart complications because melatonin protects your heart as well. And you're much more prone to disease because your immune system is not functioning at its best. So these are some of the things that happen when you have a lowered melatonin level. And for example, the average woman with breast cancer has only got 1/10 of the melatonin of a normal woman of her age. And for people with prostate cancer, they've got less than half the melatonin that they should have. Autistic children have less than half the melatonin levels that they should enjoy.
Reduced melatonin in night shift workers, because they're working at night and exposed to light, they don't produce nocturnal melatonin, is known to produce a 50% increase in breast cancer risk. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, has actually classed night shift work as a class 2A probable carcinogen because of this melatonin reduction.
There are lots of studies now showing that people on night shifts or people who are blind have different cancer rates than the average population. And most of those studies support the view that the absence or the lowered melatonin has an adverse effect on health.
Because the body only repairs itself at night, melatonin is only produced when the pineal gland senses that no light is present.
What happens is that the pineal gland is light sensitive. It's sitting right where your brain receives signals from your eyes, that crossover point in the middle. It's called the suprachiasmatic nuclei, and the connections from there goes directly to the pineal gland to tell it whether there's any light around or not. If there's light around, then there's also interference with the signals the brain wants to send to our cells in order to repair them. So it says there's no point in the brain sending these signals out to our cells to tell them to repair, because there's so much interference that they won't hear it. So it waits, the brain waits until it's dark.
What kind of research has shown that there's an effect on melatonin production from electric fields, magnetic fields, radio waves?
Right, well, the Battelle Institute in America has done a lot of work on this way back from the late 1970s, in fact. And their scientists there, Barrie Wilson and Dick Stevens and people like that, started thinking that because we know that if you turn the light on, then the brain stops making melatonin, they thought, well, maybe our brains can't distinguish between electric fields and that we make ourselves artificially, and the natural light that we all know happens during the daytime, because we just don't make melatonin in the daytime, for very good biological reasons. So they thought, well, maybe these electric fields.
Tesla determines that waves of energy in the Earth can be used to transmit power to any point on the globe. In laboratory tests, he successfully demonstrates the illumination of wireless lamps many miles from the laboratory. But his experiments also produce more ominous possibilities.
Alpha waves in the human brain are between 6 and 8 hertz. The wave frequency of the Schumann cavity resonates between 6 and 8 hertz. All biological systems operate in the same frequency range. The human brain's alpha waves function in this range, and the electrical resonance of the Earth is between 6 and 8 hertz. Thus, our entire biological system, the brain and the Earth itself, work on the same frequencies. If we can control that resonance system electronically, we could directly control the entire mental system of humankind.
Tesla, aware of the awesome power this aspect of his discovery might unleash, decides to keep it under wraps. With the success of the Colorado experiments, Tesla moves back to New York City. After courting several financial backers, he is introduced to J.P. Morgan, the infamous banker and international financier.
The circadian rhythm is the day-night cycle that is engraved into all life. Over a 30-year period, the professor conducted experiments in which student volunteers would spend several weeks at a time living in the bunker, completely shielded from the natural resonances of the Earth. In his results, Weaver noted some astonishing findings. He discovered that when Schumann resonance was filtered out of the bunker, the students' physical and mental health would suffer.
He took students down there. He didn't trust to do it with ill or old people. He took young students down there because he knew, Weaver knew that there would be an effect. So obviously underground you don't have Schumann resonance. You only have the transverse magnetic fields from in the Earth. So by putting them underground, they started feeling sick, having headaches. Their circadian rhythm was completely upset. The interesting thing was, when he just introduced the 7.8 hertz frequency, with a magnetic pulse generator, that immediately stopped.
Weaver would secretly introduce the 7.83 frequency to the bunker via a man-made transmitter. Each time he did so, he noted the ill effects suffered by the volunteers either disappeared or decreased. Their stress, headaches and emotional distress was reduced, and their sense of well-being was restored. All by the introduction of Schumann resonance. Weaver's research had revealed an incredible connection between human health and the natural frequency of the planet. And in 2011, groundbreaking research suggested something even more impressive, that Schumann resonance could be connected to the beginnings of life itself. The breakthrough came at the hands of Luc Montagnier, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who first discovered the HIV virus. The professor was conducting water memory experiments, examining how water could retain a memory of substances that had previously been dissolved in it, when he stumbled upon something that would challenge the very principles of science. All life comes from life. This is a fundamental principle of science, and one which has never been violated in any experiment. Life can only exist where life has existed before. And the mechanism for this has always been understood to be a material one, such as egg and sperm, or spore and cell division.
These tubes are not plugged in to any power source, but they still light up. It's electricity's invisible effect, an effect not just confined to the wires it flows through. In the middle of the 19th century, a great theory was proposed to explain how this could be.
The theory says that surrounding any electric charge, and there's a lot of electricity flowing above my head, is a force field.
These fluorescent tubes are lit purely because they're under the influence of the force field from the power cables above. The theory that a flow of electricity could in some way create an invisible force field was originally proposed by Michael Faraday, but it would take a brilliant young Scotsman called James Clerk Maxwell who would prove Faraday correct, and not through experimentation, but through mathematics.
If they are stimulated. Yeah, I mean, voices are the easiest ones, because all you have to do is stimulate the cochlea with a set resonant frequency. It's very easy. Voices are very easy. And it isn't people imagining voices, they physically hear them. They physically hear, as I'm talking to you, my voice isn't inside your brain. My voice goes no further than an inch into your ear, no further at all. It's the electrical signal that makes you interpret how I sound. And once you've got this electrical signal, which can be a chip or lots of things, you can physically make people hear voices, certain voices, and it can be any conversation, and it can be anybody you want to hear. It can be a soft, angelic voice. It can be a god. It can be something that scares you, like a devil. It can be anything. It's been shown that a child using a cell phone, just an ordinary school child, if the child uses the phone for just 2 minutes, the brain waves can take up to 2 hours to return to normal. 2 hours. And that's been published. Now, in those 2 hours, the child's brain is not acting as it should, and it could demonstrate itself in a number of ways. For instance, if the child were in school and made a quick call from the playground, it could be lack of concentration, hyperactivity, bad behaviour. It could be anything like that. And that would slowly ease off over 2 hours. Now that's just from 2 minutes. Now if a child makes a phone call every couple of hours, the brain is going to be entrained permanently. And it's already been published by the industry that a child using microwaves just before bed will have his or her sleep totally disrupted by entrainment. I cited, I think, 200 schools in Europe where a transmitter had been put in or near the playground where they had leukemia clusters. Some of our own MPs here have stood up in Parliament to say that they have 11 children under the age of 11 with leukemia around a transmitter, or 18 children. I mean, it's so. I mean, cancers are reaching epidemic proportions. There are lots of different types of cancers coming up now. I would think, I know in China, they've just had a 3,000% increase in parotid gland cancer, which is the side of the face where you would hold a mobile. We're getting cancers of the eye coming up. Obviously, brain tumours. In fact, brain tumours are quite enormous now in terms of numbers. That I read a report, and I read this out in Canada last year. People are so worried about the numbers of brain tumours that they've re-diagnosed 10,000 brain tumours as endocrine cancers to take them off the statistics. And I do know that in the European Union, we have been told that cancers are at epidemic proportions, and we're talking generally cancers between the ear and the brain. Years ago, our government said to its scientists, when it comes to microwaves, you will only talk about things to do with heat, and that is it. So they won't even discuss anything else. They will deny anything that doesn't have anything to do with heat. They even deny all of their 40 years of research leading up to this. Although they said this can cause cancer and all the damage, they say, no, it can't. We're only looking at heat, and heat is all that matters. Yeah, I prefer to call it lying.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I think I've never known so many liars in my life as what is coming out now from the government. I mean, to put it simply, they did all the research, they knew the dangers, and then they decided to lie to the public for no other reason than to save themselves with lawsuits and to make money for industry. And that's written down, and I've got that written down.
Okay.
So for the last 40 years, the government, the English government, has been lying to the people. And the American government, the Canadian, the Australian, they have been lying. They have been lying to protect industry, protect their profits, to protect themselves from lawsuits. They are really just liars, and it's provable. I made a statement in Birmingham, in this country, probably 15 years ago, and I haven't changed it since. And I've said that I believe that this industry and the part of the government which is encouraging them will be responsible for more civilian deaths and suffering than all the terrorist groups in the world ever. And with the growth of the industry over the last 15 years, I would say now that these people are probably going to cause more death and suffering than the entire Second World War. And is that genocide? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. And are they going to get away with it? Yes, because they are untouchable. They are outside the law.
Who is actually behind those decisions? Is this sanctioned by the WHO?
Sanctioned by the World Health Organization, without a shadow of a doubt. It is the same people. It's the same people sit on the ICNIRP certificate. They sit on our government's Health Protection Agency, sit on the World Health Organization. It's the same people. It's the same people. There's probably no more than 20 of them. But yes, they are going to, in my opinion, commit the worst genocide this planet has ever known. Not just people, but animals, plants. They are probably going to cause more destruction than a global war. And in several hundred years' time, people will look back, whoever survives, and look at what we try to do to stop them. Operation Paperclip. At the end of the war, the scientists were pardoned, most of them. They were pardoned for all of the people they had killed, experimented on. They were given new identities, mostly in the United States. They were given new identities, lived an ordinary civilian life, very well paid, and they went to work in laboratories for the American government. And they handed over all of their research, and this is where it came from. And this was the basis of all of this, Operation Paperclip. If they could catch somebody and keep their name secret, that was Operation Paperclip, and they took them back. They took them back and they kept them. They used all of their resources, and there was a lot of scientists. They used all of their resources, and that was the basis of the mind control, the drugs, and everything else. I do know one experiment, just to give you some examples. I know that they found that with one of the subheadings was the microwaves on pregnant women. And they found that they could cause a 57.7 increase in miscarriages in pregnant women, which is just one experiment, you know. So what you're actually doing is killing 57% of all the children. Again, mixing microwaves or electromagnetic waves with LSD, lysergic acid, on 4-year-olds. They just experimented on people, causing any amount of suffering to the point of death. And if people ended up in metal cages, or stone boxes for the rest of their lives, that was the way it was going to be because they were allowed to be experimented on. But as I say, there is no boundary. There is nothing which, to me, is too low. I mean, if you're going to attack a uterus in a child, you can't get much lower. And this is what they were all about. At the end of the Second World War, a committee was formed by all of the Western Allies, the United States and Russia. And it was called the Nuremberg Treaty. And the Nuremberg Treaty was agreed by all the countries from the end of the Second World War. It was set up to stop people like Joseph Mengele, the Doctor of Death, in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where he experimented on twins. And they, from the Japanese torturing the American and the British and the European soldiers, the Germans experimenting, the Nuremberg Treaty was set up, and it's very defined and very succinct. And it says that no person may be experimented upon for any reason, and this includes microwave irradiation, for any reason without their consent. And before they give their consent, they must have full knowledge of the length of the experiment, the outcomes, any potential dangers, any potential ill healths. It must be fully understood and explained, and they must give individual consent. And this includes Tetra, which is an experiment that's going on until 2018 to look for cancer and brain damage. So everybody using Tetra is actually breaking the law, the people organising them. So that was set up. So experiments on people, service personnel, the police officers with Tetra, microwaves, it is all illegal according to the Nuremberg Treaty.
As far as I know, the Nuremberg Code and the Nuremberg Treaty was created after the Nuremberg trials.
Right, yep.
And in the Nuremberg trials, there was a specific trial called the doctors' trials.
Yep.
Do you recall the sentencing of those trials?
They were hanged.
Yeah.
Oh, and I've written it. I've written it in my papers, and I've said it on air in the radio. In fact, I said it, I was on international radio. It went out to 95 countries 2 Sundays ago. And I said, scientists at the end of the war were hanged for what scientists today are doing and getting away with. Absolutely, yep.
Sentences you to death by hanging at such time and place as higher authority may direct.